Ms.Rafiqua Ferdousi, research economist here at SANEM, using behavioral economic research insights into public policy designs, unlocking a new horizon of sustainable development in Bangladesh. We're all keen to listen to you. You have the floor.
Must spell this out in the beginning before I start my presentation that my paper is far from being a technical one. In fact, my paper deviates quite a bit from the standard neoclassical assumption of the field of economics itself. So I'm going to talk about behavioral economics today, and my paper is mainly based on the major literatures and the recent developments of this field. And I just want to take this opportunity to take this platform and to share, what I have learned so far about the field of behavioral economics and how the insights from this field can be used in the design of public policy, especially in the context of Bangladesh. So I would like to take this opportunity to really attract the attention, especially of the young minds who are present over here. So let's move on. I hope this works. Yep. So I was really motivated to work on this topic because after Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler won the Nobel Prize in economics in 2002 and 2007 respectively for their contribution in the field of behavioral economics, it really started to attract the attention of policymakers and academics at the same time. So from that time onwards, the nexus between behavioral economics and public policy is really growing. However, there are some initiatives in Bangladesh, and we are really privileged to have some of the pioneers in the field of behavioral economics and also experimental economics in Bangladesh who are present in our conference. But in my opinion, the work we're doing here is really not adequate. And since we are talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, I really believe that we need a really high number of research that can give us evidence and that can really guide our public policies. And this is the only way, I think, that we'll be able to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over the evolution of the field of behavioral economics and how it relates to public policy around the world, the works that are already there, and I'm going to briefly go over how we could use these research insights, or maybe we could initiate new research in the context of public policy in Bangladesh. So what is behavioral economics? Well, behavioral economics, as I mentioned before, it slightly deviates from neoclassical economics, but it really does not reject the overall assumptions. Rather, behavioral economics takes the assumptions, the standard assumptions of utility maximization, equilibrium, and efficiency of the standard economic models, and tries to strengthen them with the guidelines from psychology and other related or allied disciplines. So when did it all start? Honestly, we can trace back the origin of behavioral economics to Adam Smith, and one of his great contributions, the theory of moral sentiment, was one of the most guiding literature in behavioral economics. So many of the classical and neoclassical economists back then, they tried to discuss or highlight the importance of taking into consideration the psychological underpinnings of human behavior into the field of economics, because the field of economics is basically the science about human decision making. So if we do not take into consideration that part, we really miss out a lot. But in the beginning of the 20th century, the field of economics and psychology diverged, because at that time, the way psychologists were conducting their research and the way economists were conducting their research was quite different. And economists thought, or maybe it was a popular belief, that if we incorporate the learnings from the field of psychology into economics, this is not going to work with the mathematical structure of the field of economics. So that's why the both field really diverged. However, the link between psychology and economics started to come back, especially with the work of Herbert Simon. So behavioral economics as we know today, or the modern day behavioral economics, has started with the work of Herbert Simon and Ward Edwards in the, from 1953. But I must mention that there was a change in the field of psychology as well. So before, when economics and psychology diverged, the main field of, the main school of thought in psychology was behaviorism. And opposed to that, a new field emerged, a new way of doing research emerged. That's the cognitive psychology, which takes into consideration the mental process and logical thinking of people. So it was a completely different approach towards understanding human behavior. So when there was a change in the field of psychology, naturally many of the cognitive psychologists started to test the standard model of economics against those newly formed assumptions. And they really started to get interesting findings. So two of the most important or influential cognitive psychologists in this regard are Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, to whom we really owe a lot, and who really appropriated this field with 21 papers and 2 books together. And furthermore, when Richard Thaler and Eric Warner started to work on behavioral economics onwards, it really laid the foundation of today's modern day behavioral economics. So I'm going to quickly go over a few concepts that modern behavioral economics deals with. First one is preference and utility. The second one is expected utility and subjective probability. The third one is prospect theory. And the fourth one is intertemporal choice. So I'm going to spare you the mathematical modeling and equations here. What I'm going to share with you is that in economics, when we try to understand human behavior, or behavior of groups or firms, or when we try to quantify anything, when we try to model anything, we usually try to quantify it in a logical way. So for example, if X is at least as good as Y to an individual, then, or X is, so if there are 2 goods, for example, and among those 2 goods, at least one is preferred over another, or the 2 goods could be indifferent to, with one another. So finally, what I want to draw your attention to the last line and say that we can see over here that if an individual prefers X over Y and strictly prefers X over Y, and Y is as good as Z, then that individual should prefer X over Z. But in real life, this often deviates. We can also express the utility and these sort of things with the help of the utility function. However, to present people's preference like this, we need to have a finite set of alternatives, which often is not the case. In real life, we cannot calculate all of our available options, and instead we just follow a rule of thumb in decision making. Same with the expected probability. So in real life, we often fail to predict the exact probability of things, and we just make up our mind and believe in a subjective probability and take decisions. For example, there are many biases identified by behavioral economists. One of them are representativeness bias or availability bias. For example, if there is a car crash, or if there is a, for example, if there is a plane crash, and it happens in a row, like you see in the newspaper, there are quite a few number of plane crashes. The ticket sale of the plane maybe could reduce, by that, because people will form a subjective belief that, my next flight might crash or something. So the next big idea is prospect theory, where Richard Thaler has shown us that when we calculate losses and gains, we do it with a value function. So in standard economics, the value functions are straight lines. However, behavioral economists have shown that people value equal amount of losses more than equal amount of gains. So to us, losses are larger. And finally, intertemporal choice. So in standard economics, we often use exponential discounting. And exponential discounting is often also used in policy in terms of cost-benefit analysis and other analysis. And there we believe that people are time consistent. That means we will take the same decision in the present moment and also in the future. However, research findings have shown that we are not time consistent, and behavioral economists have shown that people tend to have a present bias. So we are biased towards our present, and we often forget to make the optimum decision in the future. An example could be we take up the gym membership in the beginning of the year, thinking that we're gonna hit the gym every day, and then eventually we don't. So these are some of the research methods that behavioral economists use, but I'll go over to the public policy domain. So there is a behavioral insights team within the UK government, and they started their work in 2010. OECD also conducted the first mapping of the application insights in 2014. And in 2015, the World Bank published the World Development Report, focusing on the application of behavioral insights to development policy. So you can see that even the international community has started to adopt the newly found assumptions from this new field. So I'll just quickly go over these findings from the UK Behavioral Insights team. So if you take just the first letters from all these 9 highlighted words, it translates into a mnemonic, that's mind space. And their report is called Mind Space. So they have said that how does human beings work in real life, and how does our biases work? So we are heavily influenced by who is communicating information to us. We are also our incentives are shaped by predictable mental shortcuts. Like I said, in prospect theory, we always try to avoid loss. And we are strongly influenced by what others do, and we also try to go with the flow. And human beings' attention is drawn to what is novel and what seems relevant to them. So you can clearly see that we have these biases in our day-to-day life. Finally, our emotions also shapes our decision making, and if we commit something in public, we usually try to keep the promise, and we try to act in a way that makes us feel better about ourselves. So what's the prospect of all these insights for Bangladesh? So here maybe I can draw your attention to the field of political as well, because in terms of noise pollution or plastic pollution or in general, we have rules in Bangladesh, but in reality, the situation is really, not that promising. So maybe in these areas, we can try to have or design behavioral interventions and try to see, what kind of impact it can have on sustainable development. So even the proponents of behavioral economics also warned us about the challenges of using this method. Nevertheless, I would say that given the limitation, there are still higher prospects of using this novel method in the public policy design of Bangladesh. So that will be all from me. Thank you.